Introducing Punchbowl News. From Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, and John Bresnahan. News about the people who matter, for the people who matter. Join the community at punchbowl.news.
As somebody who chases Senator McConnell around a lot and is often ignored, I'm happy to have him on a stage where it's going to be much more difficult to ignore me. But
it's not because I don't like you.
Okay, so let's start on something that you're I think very focused on, the Supreme Court. Something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about, a lot of time strategizing about when you were majority leader. Senator Susan Collins said yesterday, I believe, that I don't know what that back feed is, that she was going to vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson for the Supreme Court. Do you think there will be any other Republicans who join her?
I don't know for sure. Obviously, the nominee is well qualified and exactly the kind of nominee you would expect from a liberal president. I think those of us who are not going to support her are troubled by two things. In my case, I thought it was not asking too much for her to agree with Justice Ginsburg and Justice Breyer that packing the Supreme Court is a bad idea. Her refusal to do that, I thought, was strange. And then there's a whole issue that was much on display in committee with regard to her attitude about sentencing with certain kinds of criminal cases, in which it appears as if 100% of the time she was below the sentencing guidelines. I think that was troubling to a lot of our members. But, I think she's the kind of nominee that the president would want, and I don't think he'll be disappointed in her performance over the years.
I want to take a step back in terms of the Supreme Court. In Collins' statement, she pointed out that Justice Antonin Scalia was confirmed by a 98-0 vote in 1986. Ruth Bader Ginsburg cleared the Senate by 96-3. You voted for RBG. What's changed? There's that kind of bipartisan nature is just not happening anymore when it comes to the Supreme Court.
I think once the Democrats assassinated Robert Bork, it was pretty clear that we were moving into a period of, at least at that point, periodic Senate assertiveness, advise, and consent. What does it mean? It means whatever the Senate at any given time thinks it means. But I think it's pretty safe to say now, after back and forth from Bork to Thomas and then a brief détente, that we actually generated on appointments like Ginsburg and Breyer. The Senate is in a full assertiveness mode. In other words, I think no matter who's in the majority in the Senate, for the foreseeable future, I think the confirmation process is going to be viewed by senators as a co-responsibility. In other words, the president gets to initiate, but we're full partners in the process.
And you think that wasn't the case before? And do you think that
off and on, and this was certainly my view when I was a young staffer on the Judiciary Committee when Nixon had two appointments defeated, was that you owed the president deference. And this was Susan Collins's argument yesterday. And she was focused more on sheer qualifications and not philosophy or how you might rule. I think that is not the view of most senators on either side now. And that explains why we've had narrow, heatedly contested confirmation processes.
How does that ever go back, do you think? Is there ever a time?
Well, everything changes in this country. Depends on when you want to start measuring. But I think for the foreseeable future, I think the best way to sum it up is the Senate believes it is a co-partner with the president in the business of confirming lifetime appointments.
You talk about who knows what the future is, will lay for the Senate, but you've been there since 1985. What's the biggest difference between the Senate today and the Senate when you were a first-term member?
Well, I think when I first got to the Senate, there were liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats. I think what's happened over the years is basically a realignment in which there's one right of center party and one left of center party. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but the labels were not quite as clear when I first got there. I think there's been a steady movement in the direction of having two mostly defined parties, as I said, one right of center, one left of center.
Now, sitting here today, March 31st, you could be in the majority come next year. You might not be. Do you have a cutoff for considering a Supreme Court justice if you were in the majority?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to address that.
So that's your example. That's your on stage.
That's the hall treatment.
Yeah, okay, I know that he's not going to answer. I can follow up a bunch of times if you'd like, but I know he's not going to answer.
One thing that I hope you will answer is about Senator Rick Scott. In an AP story that posted yesterday, he compared himself to Ulysses S. Grant. I'm not sure if you saw that one. He seemed to be saying, take Vicksburg in the Civil War. I'm always going to be perceived as an outsider. He said he's going to keep doing what he believes, whether people like it or not. What's your response to that?
Well, I think you'd have to ask him about that because those are his comments. What Rick Scott and I have in common is we both have a desire to see us in the majority this November, and I appreciate the work he's doing at the Senatorial Committee. It's been widely reported. We have some differences of opinion about strategy, but I think we'll get past that, and I think what's really going to be dominant in the fall is we know this is going to be a midterm report card on the performance of the president, and the president's approval rating is what's going to drive the fall election. As you point out, I've been around a while, and the best generic ballot question I can recall was +3 for us. I saw one the other day that had +10. So the one thing I think you can safely say going into the 22 election is we're going to have a really good environment. So it leads to the second question, which is, how could you screw this up? Well, I'm going to mention 4 names. Some of you may actually remember. Christine O'Donnell, Sharon Angle, Todd Aiken, Richard Murdoch. What's the point I'm making? You have to have electable nominees. And so far, we're moving into the primary season. I'm optimistic that we're going to have a fully electable nominee in every one of the places that will determine our majority. And if you look at where the majority lies, these are almost all very competitive states in November. Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Ohio, most of the time. It's been a little red lately, but the Democrats have apparently recruited a candidate in Missouri, so that could end up being competitive. Nevada, Arizona. What they all have in common is you better nominate a fully capable, credible nominee, or you're in trouble.
You were going to talk about this at the end, all these races, but you've led us into it, so we'll move to it now. Do you anticipate, it doesn't sound like you do you anticipate getting involved or weighing in on any primaries?
I might, and I might not. It depends. I don't have an ideological test. I mean, for example, how you feel about former President Trump is irrelevant. There are ways of measuring a credible candidate, and that's what I want. This is not an ideological litmus test or how you feel about the former president. It's can you win in November? And since we're not fully into the primary season yet, I can't answer your question, but could I get involved? Yeah, I could.
Safe to say if in Missouri Eric Greitens rises, that might be something you might want to get involved in? Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about any particular state.
Got it. I'm 0 for 2.
It's getting shut down over here.
Why do you think? Let me follow up on that. Why do you've had a couple of misses, high-profile misses in Arizona, New Hampshire, some states where high-profile candidates have said no to serving in the Senate. Do you have a view on why people are not interested in serving in the Senate right now?
Yeah, I think that's kind of overplayed. We've got a number of former governors in the Senate who enjoy it, and I'm sure that being the CEO is more attractive to some people than others. But what I always point out is if you have to be on the board, it's a pretty good board.
That's a good way to put it.
And I deeply respect the institution of the Senate. I think it's extremely important to the future of the country. And those are the kind of arguments we make to recruits that we're trying to get interested in running for the Senate. We'd love to have had some of these governors, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to win the seats.
Let me just follow up on one more election-related question, and then we'll move to Ukraine. These ads that are running, I mean, you're seeing them in some of these states based on what Rick Scott has released. I mean, what do you make of those ads that people that he wants to raise taxes on low-income Americans, that there's a sense that he wants to vote on laws every 5 years and have them sunset? I mean, how do you view that? How
I
does that
think
make
I've
you feel?
addressed that before. My view is, obviously, a candidate has to answer the question, what are you for? And we will fully lay out for all of our candidates after the primaries things that we think make sense and are likely to be on the agenda. Certainly, if I'm the majority leader, on the agenda will not be raising taxes on half the American people or sunsetting Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid in 5 years. I don't think that's a strategy that's useful to a candidate, say, in Arizona or Nevada.
Right.
And in the end, the candidates themselves will decide what they think works. And I intend to give them a different approach.
Do you have any thoughts on Scott potentially challenging you for leader?
The election occurs every 2 years. I'm proud that I've been elected 8 times without opposition, but I don't own the job, and anybody in the conference can run who chooses to.
All right, let's shift to Ukraine. You have criticized the administration for following the GOP lead on Ukraine as being too slow about it. Can you explain your position?
Yeah. I think our attitude about this war could be expressed very simply. We're in it to help the Ukrainians win. And I think from the very beginning, the president's sort of been pulling his punches, acting a little bit too late on every occasion, out of a sort of fear of provocation. Well, the Russians are provoked. I mean, they're already provoked. They're in the country.
Right.
They're killing civilians, and I do think they're picking up the pace some, and we hear reports they're getting weapons and ammunition and other things the Ukrainians need more rapidly. I hope that continues because I think the Ukrainians, I think our goal ought to be to help them win. My favorite line was, I think my colleague Ben Sass said, we ought to send them anything that will shoot.
It's safe to say, based on what you're saying, that they've picked up the pace. It's safe to say you were heartened by I'm not putting words in your mouth, but were you heartened by your briefing yesterday that you got on Ukraine, the full Senate classified briefing?
It's a shame that we've had to kind of beat them into acting more rapidly, but I do think they're picking up the pace, and I think that gives the Ukrainians a better chance to win. An example of something I think was just utterly absurd. Why would you consider it provocative to assist the Poles in getting the MiGs into the Ukrainians? Well, they're already shooting at each other in Ukraine. The provocation is on full display. In other words, I think our approach ought to be give them everything we possibly can that gives them a chance to beat the Russians.
Let me ask you, just on a follow-up to that, I mean, do you have a red line? I mean, I've been asking members of Congress this recently. If Putin starts using chemical weapons or taking this a step farther than he already has, is there any situation that you could foresee in that realm where the U.S. should get?
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate about something like that. We've got a land war going on in Ukraine, and we need to help the Ukrainians beat them. I think they have the ability to do it, and we ought to help them do it.
I want to shift to COVID relief. That's one of the packages that Senate Majority Leader Schumer and a lot of your colleagues have been working on. Tell us what's going on there with COVID prep talks. Rand Paul has dropped his hold, but is still seeking a compromise. Romney's negotiating. What's the latest?
Yeah, Mitt and Roy Blunt and Richard Burr are in the lead for us on this, and what we want to do, given the fact that we dropped $2 trillion on the economy last year, is to pay for the package. It's sort of still in kind of a work in progress, but as of late last night, it appeared as if that it would be skinnied down from 15 to 10. Unfortunately, because the Democrats are unwilling to find another $5 billion out of this $2 trillion bill, about $100 billion of it not out the door yet. So, and that has the potential to take out the international vaccine part, which I think is terribly unfortunate. But that's where we are at the moment. Whether that's going to completely come together is not clear. Romney's going to brief my conference at noon today on where he thinks we are.
Are you optimistic that it can get done before the Easter recess?
We'll see. Hope so. Hopefully.
Okay.
On Iran, it seems as if it's possible you're going to be voting on some sort of disapproval resolution in the next 6 months, 4 months, who knows how long it'll be. I guess I want to get your thoughts on where they are. Obviously, you've been briefed a number of times. And I guess the question I have is, do you think the maximum pressure campaign that the Trump administration had on worked? Because some in your party and in the Democratic Party said it didn't work. And if not, what is the answer to this situation?
Yeah, this is one area that I want to compliment the previous administration on. I think that the strides that were made with the Abraham Accords are really noteworthy. And I think had it been made in some other administration, it would have gotten more praise. Basically, what the previous administration was able to do was to break the stranglehold between the Gulf states and Morocco with Israel to get normal diplomatic relations. Part of that was getting out of the Iran deal. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think the previous administration did a good job of reestablishing our friendship with Israel, which was somewhat threatened by the Iran deal, and bringing these Gulf states into a normal relationship with Israel. Now what you see is the leaders of these states, going off to visit the Russians. And I read the other day that Assad was actually in the UAE. I think flirting with the Iranians and a bad nuclear deal is a really bad idea. It was a bad idea the first time. It's a bad idea now. Not only did it not really seriously restrain their effort to get a nuclear capability, it also, of course, had nothing to do with all their collateral activities. Terrorism all around the Middle East. Israel just experienced attacks this week, probably indirectly inspired by the Iranians. I don't think anything good will come out of this deal, and even though we probably won't be able to stop it, it's not going to be a treaty, so it won't be permanent. And if there's a new administration, if it doesn't work any better than the last deal, I wouldn't be surprised to see them pulling out of it.
We talked about Russia with Ukraine, with the Iran situation. What's your biggest concern when it comes to Russia?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Mitt Romney was right in 2012. And I want to salute the late Madeleine Albright, who said she owed Mitt Romney an apology. The naivete with which the last two administrations approached the Russians, I think, was something I never bought. I think the Russian behavior hasn't changed. It isn't the Soviet Union anymore. I don't know whether they call themselves communists or something else these days, but the behavior hasn't changed consistently. They're a problem. They have been a problem all along. I want to give Vladimir Putin credit, however, for unifying NATO like nothing I'd ever thought I would see. Who would have ever expected the Germans in a social democratic chancellor administration do a complete flip-flop on energy and on providing weapons to allies? Who would have expected the Finns and the Swedes to say, hey, maybe we ought to be in NATO? The good thing that's come out of it is it reinforces once again the importance of NATO, which the previous president was skeptical about at various times. And the reason for NATO, was it Margaret Thatcher who said the purpose of NATO was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down? Well, I don't think we have to keep the Germans down anymore, because it looks to me like they're having an epiphany here as a result of this invasion.
Is there, I mean, what is the future of U.S.-Russia relations? I mean, it seems like there's talk of ending, I mean, the Russians are talking about expelling the U.S. ambassador. I mean, do you have a view on what that looks like going forward?
Well, it's not going to be good as long as they're killing Ukrainians and trying to take over another country. This is...
Is there any putting that back in the box as well?
Well, the Russians need to quit doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
We're dealing with PNTR.
That was my next question. Yeah.
Trade status, which is probably on your list.
Yes, it is.
We're hoping to get done here shortly. I think we're close. And we can't have normal relations with a country that's acting like this.
Well, on the oil front, I mean, the I don't think we asked this yet, but the administration said there was news this morning that they were considering releasing 1 million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I want to get your thoughts on that. Drop in the bucket, is that what that means?
Yeah. Look, the key here is American energy. In 2019, we were an exporter. We have the ability to not only meet our own energy needs, but to help the Europeans meet theirs as they try to wean themselves off of Russian energy. I think the administration's anti-fossil fuel views are sort of like a religion that are kind of unconnected with the needs of not only our country but the world. This policy is driven by the hard left, which the president almost never crosses, and until that policy changes, we're going to have a problem. And things like Spro being opened up for 1 million barrels is a drop in the bucket.
So you don't think, do you think that's going to be one of the biggest issues on the campaign trail, just the price of gas? I mean, Democrats don't really have an answer for it right now.
Absolutely. I think inflation, which I think they're going to, and they don't want to quit doing what they're doing. I mean, the best thing that happened last year was BBB going down, but they'd already done the damage, as Larry Summers pointed out. The so-called $2 trillion rescue plan is what produced 40-year high inflation. So they've done all the wrong things. They own this, and it'll take the Fed to squeeze it out, and I don't know how long that'll take. But they need to be stopped with all the spending. That's why even on an attractive package like the COVID thing, we're insisting on spending some of this money, reprogramming some of this massive amount of money that's still not out the door from last year.
We have a couple more minutes left. I want to ask you about some internal stuff. You've now been in this 50-50 construct for a little bit. I'm curious about your current relationship with Chuck Schumer.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I like Chuck, and we don't have any, I mean, we have different goals, but we.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It's not an adversarial relationship in any way.
And you think and do you have any thoughts about how he's managing the Senate? You've managed it before, so I'm curious.
Well, I've been the majority leader, and I've been the minority leader. The majority leader is better.
Yeah, more fun, I'm sure.
But it's challenging, and the number is makes it even more challenging. For example, last night, several of the Democrats joined us and defeated a nominee. You don't have much margin for error. Of course, when I was the majority leader, we didn't have much margin for error either.
No.
So the Senate's been pretty close for a while now. Really close now, but I mean, pretty close for a while now. And so the challenge for the majority leader, obviously, is to get all the ducks in a row because you can't lose many.
Talk about Kevin McCarthy. Jake just interviewed him in Florida, poised to become the next speaker. Do you have a relationship with him? Any observations about kind of him as a politician?
Oh, we have a good relationship. We meet frequently, talk all the time. The House and Senate are really different in a lot of ways that you all report on all the time. So my challenges are somewhat different from his. And but we
and you're lucky for that.
Yeah, actually I am.
So this is our last question. I think we're officially out of time, and I don't want to get the hook from your staff. But early 2023, you will pass Mansfield for the longest-serving Senate leader. That's right, early 2023, right? You'll tie him. Do you have any thoughts about? I mean, your legacy, what you've done, and Nancy Pelosi gets very upset that she gets asked when she's going to leave, and we never ask you if you're going to leave. So, are you eyeing the exits in any way? She says we don't ask you, and so I have to, that has to be something I ask.
Okay, since you want to ask me, I mean, obviously I'm going to run again for leader, and I never thought, honestly, I'd get to the Senate. So I'm extremely proud of the fact that my members have elected me without opposition as many times as they have, and I hope they'll do it one more time at least. And as far as what happens beyond that, we'll have to wait and see.
All right. Thank you so much, Leader McConnell. We really appreciate you coming and joining us this morning. Thank all of you for joining us in person and on the live stream. And a big thanks to AT&T for being our venue partner for this event. And just want to note that we are going to be out in Detroit on next Friday interviewing Senator Gary Peters. So join us on the live stream or in person if you are in the area. Thanks so much. Have a great day.